Hi, Kevin, and Happy New Year. I suppose we've been over a year now in terms of talking about things like Consumer Duty, the implementation of Consumer Duty with the FCA. And I suppose we've been hearing a few noises just as we start the new year from them, particularly around things like clarity of communication, I think. So what are some of the things that you've been hearing?
Well, belated Happy New Year to you, Chris. Yeah, there's been a lot going on. I think there's quite a lot going on just before Christmas. I think in particular, the FCA had a webinar on the 6th of December, which really was designed as an update on their expectations and progress made since the duty was implemented in July 2023. And there are a number of speakers at that, but in particular, Roma Pearson, who looks after consumer credit, presented some very strong messaging around vulnerability management, but also consumer understanding more generally and the quality of communications and other areas that are close to our hearts, which related to frontline training and how things are being embedded. So there's a mixture of messages, some good and some other areas that in the inevitable FCA way, highlighting areas that there was plenty of room for improvement. So coming into the new year, we focused certainly in terms of my trade body work around the pipeline of FCA work that's about to start or is already in train. So one of those is the post-implementation review of the vulnerability guidance FG 21.1. We know very shortly the policy rules for borrowers in financial difficulty, which was CP 2313 that closed July last year, is about to hit, and they've also just started some of the preliminary work around the CONCAPE review, which are the debt advice rules and guidance. And many of our members have experienced either mystery shopping or communications starting around things like financial promotions. And that obviously covers the quality and transparency of communications. But now we're getting into the probably more substantive piece, which is the intelligibility of key documents like your debt management agreement, your suitability letters, which cover the advice in durable medium, and the general review of the whole customer journey throughout a debt advice into a debt remedy process to make sure that the clunky bits are ironed out. And we're looking at key things like sustainability, suitability under the duty umbrella. And most of the correspondence now has some form of consumer duty lens overlaid on it.
So it feels like the temperature's going up a level really since last year in terms of scrutiny, and almost like going down to the next level of detail in terms of understanding fair treatment, understanding better communication, like how do we look through our communications? How do we think about how we're talking to customers?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is to look at the parallels with other sectors. So we've seen some of the obvious areas of intervention, like savings rates not going up at the same rate as interest rates on credit cards and overdrafts. And is that a sludge practice? In motor insurance, there's been a number of interventions, both in complaint handling, but also the way that customer service is delivered by insurance firms, more acutely in things like investments, number of areas where the FCA said think about provisioning where your advice wasn't up to the right level of quality. And many of those parallels can be drawn into some of the sectors we look at in the debt sector, where they're looking at, in particular, the precision that's involved, its intelligibility, which is key to make sure that your general population understand the communications that you deliver at all stages of the customer journey.
Yeah. So I know when we look through contracts or advice letters, etc., they can be quite lengthy documents, can't they? And I suppose how important is it going to be around this idea around making sure that they're condensed, but also like efficient in terms of making sure that people actually understand what's being said. It feels like that's a bit of a theme that's coming through. And I know we've got an event coming up around that.
Yeah, so the event on the 21st of February that we're doing with Amplify Global and Step Change is a very important one, in particular because Step Change have been working with Amplify now for well over a year. It was quite a symbolic event when the Mixed Messages report was delivered and keynoted by Sheldon Mills in November 2022. You and I both attended the Step Change event in September, the Step Change Connected event, where they were just about to launch the Getting the Message report out, where they had used a lot of these tools to try and improve not only the simplicity, but the intelligibility of their documentation, over 1,500 bits of communication. So really quite an important stage at the moment, where I think, as we've seen the work we've looked at, particularly with people using smartphones, it's not just about the intelligibility, it's about how you deliver these messages. And I would say generally people's attention spans are shorter, their expectations that there is something there in a medium that they can readily use. And this whole concept of layering, if you imagine you using something the size of a smartphone, enables you to go through the terms and conditions quickly, but focus on the bits that are most important to you. So that often means making sure your objectives, what you want to achieve, are clearly communicated. The pros and cons of a product, fees in particular, its fair value are reflected, how your data is going to be used. So that can run to many pages if you were to receive that in a PDF, which used to be typical, and get something then that could be digitally signed. But in reality, when it says, have you read and understood, or tick the terms and conditions to say you've read them, in practice, people just tick the box and hurry along.
And I suppose it comes down to the whole sort of like principles-led direction in terms of like consumer duty or review from the regulator, which is if you can't get hold of people and get them engaged, and then you can't actually have them actually understood what you're actually talking about, then it's very hard to provide them support and generate the good outcome. So it feels like actually underneath it's quite fundamental in terms of what this change of approach is really happening from a regulatory point of view. It's symptomatic of the change that's going on underneath, really.
Yeah, so when we think of the concept of friction, i.e., putting potentially steps into a journey to ensure that somebody's understood the journey so far, that people aren't too impetuous or jump too fast and actually sign up to something without fully understanding the implications of it, that's looked at in a good way. So probably wouldn't be regarded as sludge practice, but conversely, other areas that make it very difficult for you to do something without necessarily understanding it when you took a product out. And that's where we're often seeing sort of the buyer's remorse. Is there enough attention paid to cooling off periods, understanding sort of key features of a particular product that may actually hook you in with very little opportunity for you to exit afterwards? Now, in the debt management space, debt management agreements really should put no barriers in place to somebody exiting their agreement, but you've still got to be very clear in terms of what their obligations are. And that's difficult where you have got a product that can often be complex and require the consumer to participate in a particular way, whereas that consumer may want something that's very hands off, that they don't get involved and somebody is doing everything for them. And in reality, that's seldom the case where somebody's in problem debt. They've got to play their part. But equally well, you've got to make sure that all aspects that are important, and one, for example, today that's super important, people want to know what the outcome of something is going to be on their credit file, because that's going to be on your file typically for 6 years. So any decision they make now, they won't again regret downstream. So that's got to be explained very clearly. And that's sometimes difficult if you can't precisely determine what the outcomes are going to be, because there are vagaries in how different creditors report that data. And that's where things like the FCA Credit Information Market Study are really important. This year, we're seeing some significant changes there with the new interim working party, and that will definitely impact how things like debt remedies are reported on somebody's credit file.
So just to chat just quickly about the event on the 21st. So we got the event on the 21st of February, and we're going to go through some of the principles behind creating intelligibility, looking around the documentation, making sure that the customers can really understand what's being said. That should be pretty informative on there if people want to sign up. And I'll put a link just into the comments in this video as well. So I think that should be quite an interesting session, just with some very practical kind of tips.
Yeah, I think just going back a couple of steps, I think it's really important to remember where some of this has come from. So July last year, Jonathan Phelan at the FCA said he'd seen a 90-page suitability letter. And in December, we still had reference to communications that really weren't fit for purpose. So this concrete review that is about to start, some of the questions that they're already looking at are Do you routinely produce this type of information? How long is it? Can you determine whether somebody's actually understood the communication? Does it work for both individuals and couples presenting for debt advice? How do you handle vulnerability and tailor your communication to suit maybe accessibility needs or people with low levels of English, particularly where English is not first language? And that was referenced in the December webinar. Now, we will look at real life examples of how we've achieved some simplification, made documents more intelligible against a number of different metrics, and really the art of the possible. So, Minesh Patel, who's been leading this project to Amplify in the Innovate UK project, will look at some of the things they're already doing within consumer credit in the FCA sandbox. So, it promises to be a very exciting event, but with some very crucial projects. This isn't a wouldn't it be nice? We've got in July the next round of Consumer Duty Board notes to show that you've made incremental change, you changed your business processes, and this most definitely be one area that the regulator is looking for evidence of change.
Yeah, it should be very interesting. I know sort of like the conversations we've had. I think it'd be fascinating just to walk through it and look at real examples as well. So Kevin, thanks very much for joining me. It's been an interesting start to 24. No doubt it's going to continue just with this new approach.
It certainly will. I'll speak to you soon.